Okay, good morning or good afternoon to the folks who will be watching this. Thank you for clicking on to join us. My name is Miranda Shorts, and I am the training specialist here at Ujima Inc., the National Center on Violence Against Women in the Black Community. Today we are we are joined by the wonderful Dr. Khnuma Simmonds, where we'll be talking about Carnival. Today's Ujima talk is going to be a discussion of the historical roots and cultural importance of Carnival, as well as how Carnival serves as a method of liberation and bodily autonomy, specifically for Black women. So we're really excited. I'm really excited to learn so much from you today. But before we get started, I want to just introduce Dr. Khnuma Simmonds. Okay, so Dr. Khnuma Simmonds is a proud U.S. Virgin Islands mom who was born and raised in St. Croix. She received a BA in liberal arts from Hofstra University in New York with a major in communications and a minor in dance. Khnuma holds a master in education guidance and counseling from the University of the Virgin Islands and is a doctor of philosophy with a PhD in advanced studies in human behavior program from Capella University. Her published research investigated the impact of Caribbean music and dance on survivors of domestic violence in the U.S. Virgin Islands, and highlights the power of culture, identity, and freedom. As a founder and CEO of Girlfriendism International and the owner of My Girlfriend's Closet and Soca, Caribbean Dance Fitness, Khnuma is a full-time mompreneur who enjoys marrying her passions for entrepreneurship and advocacy. Through Girlfriendism, she advocates for women's empowerment through fashion, fitness, business, wellness, travel, and philanthropy, and also incorporates her role as a survivor of domestic violence and sexual assault to further advocate for and support survivors as the executive director of Hope Incorporated, the nonprofit sector of Girlfriendism, which is a project of the St. Croix Foundation. It is through these initiatives and others that Khnuma highlights the power of collectivism and the role of women in the growth and success of local and global communities. Khnuma is served as the executive director of the Virgin Islands Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Council, the Dual Coalition for the U.S. Virgin Islands Territory, and the formal fiscal review coordinator at the St. Croix Foundation for Community Development. She also serves as the federal programs coordinator at the Law Enforcement Planning Commission and as an associate counselor intern with the Beautiful Dreamers Behavioral and Educational Center, where she can engage in art of empathy, love, and compassion for people in a community. You have done such amazing work. I'm so excited for you to be here with us.
That's a lot. Oh my goodness. But thank you for
well,
that.
You've done a lot, and it's great to celebrate it. So I'm happy to know what you do.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for having me. It is a pleasure.
Okay, amazing. So I guess our first question, just to kind of give us a base level, is what is Carnival and how do people celebrate it? What is it?
Yeah, so that is a really good question because depending on who you ask, then you'll get different answers, right? So I can kind of give you 4 that come to mind right away. So I think when most people think about Carnival, especially folks who may not be from the islands, and maybe even some people who are from the Caribbean or different islands that also celebrate Carnival, they think of one big party in the middle of the streets with feathers and beads and costumes, right? And just pure fun and sometimes drunkenness as well. I think that's one perspective of it, right? Then the other is probably a little bit more on the other end of the spectrum. So if you ask someone who may be very, very religious what Carnival is, they may say that it is an abomination of God, child. It is just not something that is good for people to be doing, right? And then if you ask me, Carnival is one form of emancipation and liberation. And, historically, if we look at it from the historic perspective, especially in the Caribbean, Carnival was a way for enslaved Africans to communicate with each other through the art of dance, through the art of music, through their native tongue. And so while I think some of the more glamorized perspectives, whether it's one spectrum or the other, can see it as just either one big party or just one pathway to hell, that the root of it sometimes gets overlooked by those broader definitions. And so it really has started as a form of emancipation for enslaved Africans, and now has evolved into that continued act of choice on self-expression through dance, through music. And it truly is a celebration now when I look at it as well, because I do Carnival every year, honey. Okay. So, it is truly a celebration of freedom, and a celebration of choice to be able to express myself how I choose. So I know that was a long answer to your question as to how you define it, but I think it does vary based on who you ask and what their background and their experience is with it, because I think it can be judged if people have not experienced it directly. It could also be misconstrued as just being, not a meaningful act for those who may not know the history behind it. But for me, it is truly an act of liberation.
No, that was perfect. You brought up how enslaved people use it as an art form of communication. I did not know that because that's not something I've experienced, obviously. So yeah, that's really interesting to see how it's kind of progressed into this art form that we see everywhere. I think that's beautiful. I think there's power in that.
Oh, definitely power in it. And it's interesting to see how it has evolved, because again, it was something that, through the process of slavery, right? So Europeans had their own forms of carnivals and masquerades and things like that. And so often, while Europeans engaged in their own acts of carnival, they were often afraid, or they were connected, there was fear connected with the way in which enslaved Africans would have their own celebration, right? Because it's different language, different way of movement, different, drum beats, different music. They didn't understand what that was. And that scared them. So now fast forward into 23, right? To see it become something that has been glamorized, which is, everything has its pros and cons. We have lots of Europeans who come to the islands just for that experience. So it is interesting, the parallels of how it began as something that was feared, right? Because my God, what would happen if Black people were to be free and they could communicate without us understanding, right? What a powerful force of people we are if we're able to do this and to celebrate. But now to see all people from all backgrounds, and especially Europeans, wanting to come to the Caribbean and to different carnivals around the world to participate. So it's rather interesting. There's so much power in that all around.
Yeah, that is interesting to kind of see the trajectory of that
Mm-hmm.
fear becoming, our power, but also, I think sometimes they might not know like the history, and that's like the interesting part,
Right. Right.
Okay, so with that being said, what has Carnival meant to Black people in the community that you live in specifically, specifically Black women? Like we want to talk about, is that a means of liberation specifically through clothing, art? I want to hear all about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I'll give you two perspectives, one of which I'll read direct quotes from the recent research that I did with survivors, and they talk about what it means for them. And then I'll also share my perspective on what I've observed in terms of the generational responses to what Carnival means in our community. And so if we look at the elders in our community, I think there is definitely a divide between the elders and between millennials, but sometimes I forget I'm a millennial. So I'm just like on that cusp of being a millennial. So, a lot of elders have expressed that because, most of them are so aware of where Carnival derived from and the meaning and the history and somewhat, that struggle that it took to get from a place where Carnival had to be a hidden language for freedom to now a place where it is demonstrated through freedom that includes a two-piece, that may include a bead, a string of beads on the behind of our cracks. It might be, a nipple cover. It may be things that do not represent now what it was then. And also in the Virgin Islands in particular, there has kind of been it's interesting how our culture is also evolving to include representations of Carnival from other islands, meaning that in the Virgin Islands in particular, our celebration has typically been very conservative. So there's a dance called quadrille where women are fully dressed. It's a line dance, so that has a lot of influence from European culture as well. And there's also bambula dancing, which is taken more from the West African and the African influence, but also women are typically fully clothed. And so there's also masquerading, right? Where again, fully clothed, different patchwork fabrics, same level of energy, but fully clothed. So we're coming from this traditional concept of celebration that is honoring where Carnival derived, and also bringing forth all of the colors and the fabrics and the music, but everyone is fully dressed. Now, we've adopted, because the Virgin Islands is very unique in the fact that we are a US territory, but our culture, our practices, our twang, the way we talk, right? Our accent, our music, all of that is very much embedded in Caribbean culture. And so we've taken a lot from different Caribbean islands that have more of a Mardi Gras perspective or approach to Carnival, which is a lot less clothes. It's very, it could be very sexual and very sensual. It's very free. And so there has been somewhat of a divide, I think, between the two generations in that regard, where elders are concerned about, okay, when is too much too much? And then there are millennials like myself who are just like, live and let live. Because it does speak to that autonomy piece. So for me, what's most important is that women have choice as to how they want to show up, whether it's fully clothed or whether it is in a two-piece, right? So what it means for the Virgin Islands community, it's definitely still, I think, between those two generations, still one of the greatest opportunities for community, right? For the collective, for people to be together, for families to reunite. So we have people coming in from different states and countries coming in for Carnival to celebrate culture, to celebrate community. And so I think that between the two, we still have that definition, we still have that commonality. But there is still also this ongoing debate between the generations as to, is Carnival truly being represented from a historical perspective and a meaningful perspective in terms of how we have evolved in terms of our emancipation? Or has it just become one big party that has lost the history and has lost the backstory as to how we've gotten to this place? So again, it's very different based on who you ask. What I will share with you though, is some of the feedback from survivors that I interviewed during my research. And what I think was interesting is that the research was Caribbean women, music and dance, self-expression and intimate partner recovery, right? Intimate partner violence recovery. Even though I never actually said Carnival, most survivors, when I asked them about Caribbean music, I asked them about Caribbean dance, they automatically thought of Carnival. So their responses are within the context of Carnival, even though none of my research questions asked them about Carnival. So one of them said, Caribbean music and dance to me was a very spiritual connection because my grandmother was a bambula dancer. That's the dance that I just mentioned that is very historical. So she did a lot of plena, which has influence from Puerto Rican culture, so Afro-Latina culture. And it's very similar to our quadrille in the Virgin Islands. So there she's making that connection between yet 3 different regions, West Africa, Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, right? So hearing the music actually helped me to heal and to connect to her spiritually. Some of the songs can actually touch you physically, vibrationally on a different level. So I really do think that it helped my healing and connecting back to myself and being proud of myself after experiencing so many downs and lows. So she definitely talks about, almost 3 different touch points from the mid-Atlantic slave trade, from West Africa coming to Puerto Rico, coming to the Virgin Islands. But she really just talks about how the spiritual connection, right, that the Caribbean music and dance has brought in for her, connecting to her ancestors, which I think a lot of the traditional perspective of Carnival, that's what it was intended to be. But then also just that freedom, right, that freedom as well. So I know I'm talking a lot. I'm going to look for some other quotes too, but do you have feedback for me? While I look for the next one?
Really, I'm really learning a lot right now, but I think that I was just thinking about the connections between like the African diaspora and how there's so
Yeah.
much like beauty in how the carnival kind of pulls from different aspects of different cultures
Mhm.
and brings that together in such a like amazing way. And also too, the generational differences, I feel like um,
Mhm.
that's a very stark difference between what I thought. Can I ask though, when that kind of shift began towards a more like
Mhm.
liberating, I guess?
Yeah. I think for me, at least from what I recall, I mean, like I said, I've been doing carnival from elementary, junior
Mhm,
high school. Like it's just a part of
mhm,
who I what I do. Um, and so I don't know if my recollection of the shift had to do with my age, right? Because there's children's parade, right? You got to keep things at a certain appropriate age level. High school, I still remember being pretty much fully clothed, but we started to introduce a little bit more of the beads and the feathers, right? But we would wear biking shorts. We wouldn't necessarily wear thong. Um, Now though, and so I might be dating myself now. So high school was between 2000 and 2004 for me. And then, in college, that's when I would be coming back home to be in my beads and my feathers and my two-piece. I was like, I want the least amount of clothes that I can find. I've been working hard for this body and I want to show it off and I want to have a good time. And so for me, that shift started happening in high school, but I really, in college, sorry. So, a little bit after 2007.
okay.
Um, but that also kind of, now that I'm thinking about it, has also been influenced by where we have been getting and sourcing our costumes from as well. And so before, we would have a lot of local seamstresses that would be making our costumes, we started bringing in a lot more costumes from South America, from Trinidad and Tobago. And so we start to see that influence change in terms of the wardrobe, right? And also initially I was talking to someone about this too, is that before, the carnival was also an opportunity where people got together, they would rehearse months at a time. So when they come to the front, where they call the bandstand, that's where you present for the governor and for dignitaries and things like that, you had choreography. So everyone was in sync, they were dancing together. Um, and there were competitions between who had the best dance routine, who could convey their message best. There were floats that people would decorate and incorporate different parts of our culture. That part has become lost to a degree. So we don't do floats as much anymore. We don't do choreography. People are more interested in fill up my drink, let me just come down the road and let me just dance and do my own thing. And so I do see now that I'm intentionally thinking about it, how it has changed a lot from more of that educational perspective, education through dance, education through the floats and the art that was involved, to now where it is different. There's an absence of that piece of it. So yeah, I think it's been changing maybe in the last 10 to 15 years for sure. Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
That's interesting. Because I mean, my only notion of it is the celebration, but I
Yeah.
mean, I think as time goes on, things
Yeah.
change.
Yeah, it does. And I mean, that is the thing about culture, right? It's like it's important to hold on to know our history and to hold on to certain cultural traditions
Mhm.
so that we are not lost in the mix of things. And when we are with other people, that we don't lose our sense of identity. And I think as an Afro-Caribbean woman, a lot of my identity and how I show up, right? Whether it's from having locks to the jewelry that I wear, which is just very bold and very loud. All of that is influenced by my cultural identity, separate and apart from my individual identity. It informs a lot of that. And so when we do start to lose that, I think that there is some sense or feeling that we're losing ourselves. I think that's the concern from the elders, right? I think on the millennial side of my experiencing carnival though, is just this freedom of, well, what do women want? How do women want to show up? And we have a right to show up however the hell we decide to show up, right? Whether it's at carnival or anywhere else. And so being able to separate the conversations when it comes to especially like sexual violence, that is where there's been a lot of debate because, I've heard some elders say, they want to protest at carnival with a sign that says put on clothes, and I'm like, no, we're not going to do that because that is going to subliminally suggest to people that when women are violated, that somehow it was because they didn't have on enough clothes, and it was never about the clothes to begin with. That
Right.
is about power and control and oppressing people. And so we can't fight oppression with more oppression by telling women what to wear and what not to wear. That's just not going to be the solution to it. So it definitely gets heavy, those conversations. But it does help, I think, to sit in a place where, because of my work with sexual violence, where I can understand the importance for women to be able to choose what they want to do with their bodies and how they show up, whether it's in Carnival or in other spaces. And also sitting in a space where, you know, my family has been very cultural, historical, contributed to the arts, and I'm very much connected with the history of my people and my island and my space, that I can find that balance in conversations, I think. So it's a lot, but it's ever evolving. That's what culture is. People
Yeah.
define culture, you know? So it's finding the balance between the two.
And it's ever changing too, which is like the beautiful part, I say.
Yeah,
Um, but
it
also,
is.
yeah, I feel like that part of like liberation and emancipation is obviously women having that choice and how they want to show up. So you're
Yeah,
absolutely right on that front.
yeah, exactly. Because if women are liberated, then everybody else is too, right? You know, it
Like,
all starts with us being able to feel full and to be able to tap into our divine feminine energy, and recognizing that that will look different for everybody. I personally feel sexy with whether I'm dressed like a nun or if I'm in a two-piece, because it's not about the clothes, it is what's within me and how I wear the clothes. That is going to come out based on how I feel about myself internally, you know. But just being able to accept and honor the fact that it looks different for everybody. For some women, it's wearing heels. For somebody else, it's wearing sneakers. It looks different for everybody. But how do we create spaces where people can show up however they want to? And I think that is the beautiful thing about Carnival, even with a lot of a lot of the debates, is right now people just show up how they want to. And I think that's important to have those spaces where people can do that and not feel judged, at least not in the moment, right? There might be conversations about it after, as, oh, these girls coming down wearing their two pieces. And, you know, the conversation is going to be there. Chitter is going to chatter. But in the moment, especially as someone who's participated in Carnival, I have no worries about what people think. I care not. I am living life. I am in the moment. I am free. I'm connecting with the music. I'm connecting with other people, Black, white, in whatever. Everyone in between is just loving on each other. And that is how we should live every day. You know, it shouldn't have to be Carnival once a year. We all come together. That's how we should be every day. And so for me, I will continue to do Carnival. I will continue to do my Bacchanal, because that is liberation for me. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. And there's a part of collectivism in that moment too that I think is, yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, and I had this discussion actually with my pastor, honey. You know, because there was a whole conversation about it. And I took a stance and I walked out. I walked out of church. Because there was a lot of condemnation about it. And of course, you know, he called and said, well, no, we haven't seen you in a while. I said, no, you have not. Well, why is that? I said, well, since you asked, you know, the whole conversation on Carnival, I said, you know, I don't expect the church to be at the center of Juve and Mass, but I also don't expect that condemnation either, right? Because we see the world to an extent the way that we choose to see the world. And so I think that while there was one conversation happening at church about, you know, the nudity and the behavior and all of those things, I said, I didn't see those things. I didn't choose to see those things. I know that they're there, but what I chose to see are the family members who were having divides, right? Before Carnival, but all of a sudden in Carnival, they're talking and they're hugging. I'm looking at people laughing and just enjoying themselves. I'm looking at a community that is typically burdened with stress and trauma, finally having a space where they can release all of that, right? So That's what I choose to see, is that collective piece. And that is important, that it actually brings people together, whereas condemnation divides people. And so I had that conversation with him, you know, but absolutely. And so I'll read you two other quotes too, that I found from the research. I know that sometimes island Wi-Fi gets funky, and so it froze for a second. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I think it might be mine. I'm not sure
Okay.
though, but I can hear you. We're good.
Okay. Good. So what two of the others, one person, when I asked them how do they feel when they dance to Caribbean music, they said that listening to the music is one thing, but when you actually get moving to it and you hit the beats or the beats hit you, I look forward to it. I look forward to the carnival, not so I could wind my waist per se. So that's how we refer to dance when we say wine. I want to wine, I want to walk up. That's our way of saying we want to dance. So she says, not so I could wind my waist per se, but it just feels good. It feels good to be free in a moment without worry and without care. And you can deal with it afterwards, but for that moment, you're just free of it all. And that is the importance of being able to have moments like that where people can just release the stress of everyday life and just be free. And then another one that really spoke about her, the cultural piece, she says, oh my God, when I dance to Caribbean music, it's cultural, it's heritage. It takes me back to, and then she paused and then she says, it reminds me of who I am. And it takes me back to my ancestors and just a reminder of who they were, the African descendants and even the Indian descendants with all the drumming and the music they played. So that is very important to me. And so I read these because I think that it definitely can offer another layer from what most folks may see from the outside is just like, oh, we're just having one big party where people get drunk and they just act the fool. But it really isn't that maybe what is being seen on the outside, but for survivors, their words from their lips to my ears, they're saying that it's not even about all that. It helps me to remember who I am. And that I think speaks to the importance of not just sacred spaces for people to be relaxed, but to move. And that's why I am such an advocate of dance and movement, because sometimes we separate what we're processing mentally from what we're experiencing physically. And Carnival reminds us that it is connected, that thinking about being free, we embody freedom when we are in Carnival. We embody liberation when we're moving and we're dancing. So we're not only thinking about freedom, but we're doing freedom, we're living freedom, we are expressing that. And so it's that mind-body connection, and that's what the survivors were expressing. So I hope that helped to answer. It was a very long answer your question, but I hope it gives some context, because I don't want to be necessarily the spokesperson for all people in the Virgin Islands, because I can only speak from my lens, right? But you know, these are the words directly from survivors themselves, and so that I know for sure I can share that accurately.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for sharing. That very clearly demonstrated that like those spaces have meaning, those movements have meaning. Even if we don't see it from the outside, like there is true importance to that.
Yes.
Yeah, so you did talk about clothing very briefly, but could you talk a little bit more about the significance of that traditional costume and those garments that are worn?
Yeah. So again, we go back to the where we were and how we have evolved into where we are now. So where we first started with our cultural wear, we wore a lot of madras. And I almost brought a piece of it with me so I could show it to you. So, but I'll kind of give you a little bit of the history. So madras actually originated out of India. So it's like a plaid fabric. And through the Atlantic, slave trade, the mid-Atlantic slave trade, that came over to the Caribbean. And it was actually worn by Europeans. Now, Africans would get the, what do you call the scraps, right? So once Europeans made their dress with it, the scraps they would pass on to African descendants. So being that was one of the only things that they had of access to royalty or to, the European culture, they would take that and use it to wrap their head. They would take it and use it to make, patchwork of pieces to make their skirts. And so that has now evolved where every island in the Caribbean has their own madras. Now, the Virgin Islands, again, because we're in this unique space where we don't have as much of that European influence, like some of the other islands in the Caribbean, like the British Islands, they're ruled by the British. We are US. We were the last ones to actually adapt our own madras. I think it was 2 years ago. So we are the newest one on the market, but each island has their own fabric. So whenever I travel, again, that cultural identity piece, I see that madras, I'm like, who are your people? Because you're from the Virgin Islands, because I see that fabric and that's unique to us. Or when did you visit, right? It's one or the other. Either you have ties there or you visited. And so what that really represents, again, is the history, our history as a people, from where we came from, being brought over, right, to the Caribbean, and how we've been able to take something that was so demeaning in a sense to receive the scraps of, you know, the master's clothing, and to be able to redefine that, working with what you have, working with what you have access to. And that we learn a lot in the Caribbean as a people, is to do a lot with a little, right? And so from that has come an entire costume for Carnival that we display. So even the head wraps, the way that it's wrapped, if there's a point forward or if it's pointing backward, to tell you if a woman is available or if she's not available. So fashion has its own language, it's its own way of communicating, but that's who we are. That's what we've been doing from even with plantation and braiding of our hair, right? Hair braiding was used to show the route to escape. It wasn't just a style. It was a language. So from our hair braiding to our hair dress to the clothing that we wear, it tells our story from where we came from and how we remained resilient and utilized the things that we had access to, in addition to our cultural practices, to be able to emancipate ourselves. Because literally, I wore this pin, I don't know if you can see it, with 4 queens. And so the 4 queens, even though, so there's a whole emancipation story, right, of 1848, where the slaves in the Virgin Islands demanded their freedom and said, enough is enough. And then in 1878, even once, you know, slaves were freed, right, we had to be freed, otherwise it would be confusion. 1878, they're still fighting for their rights to proper labor, right? Labor rights. And that's where these queens came in and burned down half of the island and said, we're just not doing this anymore. We're not working for y'all anymore. We're burning down the very thing that is bringing in money for you, so we don't have to do this. So historically, right, all of these pieces, and you see like they have, this is the flame because they were known for the fire burn, but they have the headdress, right? So all of that, it tells our story. It's in the very fabric of who we are, what we wear, how we speak, how we behave, how we respond to things. And so, yeah, that's also demonstrated in our carnival, more so, that I will say, more so in our traditional carnivals. You saw a lot more of it. Mm-hmm. Now we have a few elders that are kind of preserving that culture. Now you will find mostly the beads and the feathers, which don't tell that historical story as much, that narrative. You don't see it as much, but there are still a few who are trying to hold on and preserve it, so that way we don't lose it.
Yeah. You mentioned the madras. That's how you pronounce it, right? Madras. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that just brought something to mind. I really think that, especially in this case, I think Black people have been able to kind of make something like that and make it beautiful and meaningful. That's definitely, I think, a form of Black resistance and emancipation. So with that being said, could you talk a little bit more about Carnival specifically being that representation of Black resistance?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, you know, from the beginning, it was an act of resistance, literally, right? Being able to celebrate freedom before you even have it. Like when you think about that, like being the co-creator of something that you want and desire and know that you deserve, even when you don't have it in that moment. And so the forward thinking of our ancestors to be able to engage in carnival practices, right? Even before it was accepted by Europeans, just within their own circles on the plantation, to be able to engage in the act of this is what it will feel like when we are free. It's almost like there was a knowing that we will be free, right? That is that resistance and that resilience, that even though we are being placed in, we've been stolen from our family, from everything that we know, from our native tongue, and being put in a completely strange place under the worst conditions, that we know that we will be free, even if it's not us, the generations to come. And so we're going to engage in that practice through Carnival that is so forward thinking, and that is such a demonstration of how we heal ourselves, right, through the act of Carnival and through movement and through all of our traditional practices. And so now fast forward to now, even in our two pieces, that is an act of resistance, right? So maybe we're resisting something different, right? Maybe we're not resisting Europeans in this case, but women are saying we are going to wear what we want to wear. This is a form of resistance. We're resisting, popular culture and the fact that, because we decide to wear this, that people think we should be treated like that. We're resisting the fact that, culture is an ever evolving, that because it was traditionally fully clothed, that now for some reason we shouldn't be able to show up how we want to. And so Carnival has been an act of resistance from the very beginning. And even now, even though what we're resisting may be different, it's still an act of resistance, right? And just speaks to who we are as a people, to be able to have the nerve to do it in the middle of the street, just out in the open. Like, not only are we going to resist, we're going to be open and unapologetic about it. And that is definitely, I think, the energy that I come down the street with, is kind of, I'm very aware of what the conversations are and what the concerns are. But for me, I'm going to do it anyway. And I'm going to be even extra about it, because it is my own personal form of resistance, that you cannot box people in, and especially cannot box women in and say that, oh, because you're educated, you shouldn't behave this way. Or, oh, because you are a believer, right? Or that you're a lover of Christ, that you cannot do Carnival. Or that because you do this, then you can't do that. In life, it's not either or, it's both and, right? I am a lover of God, honey, and I will be in Carnival. Where is my sign-up sheet? Okay, give me both. Right? I am your doctor when I'm in the classroom, but I am also that girl who loves to party and do pure bacchanal, because all of these things, this is what makes us whole. It's balance. I think that is what healing is. It's balance. And so Carnival has absolutely represented, resistance from the beginning up until now, and hopefully in having these continued conversations. So thank you to you and to Ujima for being persistent in making sure that we have this conversation, that we find balance, right, as a people, that we find balance as a society, because that is where healing is. So absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah. There is no either or, it is all and everything.
Yeah.
And that is a great way to put it, truly.
Thank you.
Yeah. So what are some misconceptions you've heard about Carnival from the outside? And where do you think those misconceptions come from? And how do community members maybe address them?
Yeah, well, I think for one, this perspective that Carnival is just about drinking and getting drunk.
Mhm.
Something that I've always kind of been really proud of, being from the Caribbean, especially, drinking is not a big deal, right? And part of it is, for a very long time, I think in the United States it's still 21, is it?
Yes.
Drinking age. Okay. So ours was 18. And so when I went to college, that was one of the things that was just kind of like a big deal. Like, everybody just wanted to go out and drink. I was like, I'll have a drink or two or three, but that's not what I'm going out for. I'm going to dance. I'm going to feel free. I'm going to have a good time. I'm going to have fun. And so I think because culturally, one, our drinking age, our legal drinking age was earlier. And then also, here we go back to these cultural practices. Rum is used a lot as a healing agent for a lot of different things. So when somebody is coughing or they have a headache, people go to rum as a form of medicine, right? Plants and rum. Those two things could heal all things, honey, right? And so it's just kind of like drinking water. Well, I shouldn't say drinking water, not to give the perspective that we're all out here just drinking rum, but our relationship with rum is very different, right? Where it has always been present, not used necessarily to be drunk, but for healing in some cases. So when we get to Carnival, you know, a lot of people, I think, especially from the outside that may not have that history, that foundation of where it started from and why we do this, is that, oh, it's just a one big party to go and get drunk. And that has never been my experience. And I think the experience of a lot of people in community, because our relationship with alcohol has been so different. It's always kind of been available. It hasn't been, you know, a big deal per se. And so for me, it's been more about the dance and the music and connecting with people and the freedom. And like alcohol's in there, but it's kind of like more to the bottom. So I think that's one perspective, is that, you know, if folks want to, you know, do Carnival and also kind of honor where it's come from, to all, you know, always get that history, because it's different for every place as well, that place-based history and place-based advocacy. It's different for everyone everywhere. But to even, you know, just consider doing Carnival without a drink first and see what that's like, to fully be immersed in it without having the experience be altered by a substance, if that makes sense, right? To be able to come and do Carnival and experience it unaltered, and then have a drink after they've had that experience. So I think that's probably one of the perspectives. And then the other, you know, again, just kind of comes back to the generational and who you ask. I think some people will just have that perspective of, oh my God, I don't do that. That's just like crazy behavior kind of thing. And again, I would say to people, first, have you done it, right? Have you immersed yourself in it? Because it's definitely one thing to observe an act and another thing to participate. And so to them, I would say, allow yourself to do it once. And if it's not for you, it may not be for you, right? Not everybody is going to receive and experience Carnival the same way as with anything else, right? But you really can't judge something that you haven't experienced fully. Because again, what I choose to see and what I have always experienced is that sense of freedom and liberation and connecting and diversity and inclusion. You want a perfect DE&I training, do Carnival, because everybody's there and nobody cares, right? Nobody cares, you know, what color of your skin, what your sexual orientation is. Everybody's there to just have fun in that moment. Now, when Carnival is finished, you know, ignorance can blur people's vision, but in that moment, people are just about freedom. So I would say to folks to not have that perspective that it's just crazy wild behavior. Have that experience and allow yourself to actually know what it's like to let your guard down, to let your wall down, and to just be. And then also for people who may be on the other spectrum, again, like where, oh, you just come on and you get drunk. For them, I'll say find the balance in knowing the history and experience it from a place of being free and being comfortable in your own skin.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the United States definitely has a very different relationship with alcohol. So rum being used as healing is something that like I've never heard, but that's really interesting. So thank you for sharing. I would have never even thought of that.
Most, especially, I don't want to say old time traditional Caribbean people, but just about every cabinet has some old aged rum that doesn't necessarily taste good because it's not for drinking. It's there for, you know, if you're feeling sick, you have a cough, you take a shot of rum. You squeeze your ginger, your garlic, your lime, you go out in your garden, you get a little plant or something. So people are more prone to doing that than going to a store to buy Tylenol or to buy, you know, some other medicinal form that has been like GMO'd out. We'll go outside, go get something from your garden, put a shot of rum that was going to knock it out, you know? And so that has been the relationship with rum. So it is definitely different.
That's actually really cool to use like plants and medicine as like forms of healing. I mean, I feel like here sometimes I know like there's a shift towards like natural medicine now, but I feel like, yeah, that's not something I ever would have, you know, thought about.
No, and it's a beautiful thing. I think that, you know, one of the benefits of, again, being in a space where you don't have access to everything, that sometimes, because in my example, I was tempted to say, we wouldn't necessarily just go down to Walgreens. And I'm like, well, we don't have a Walgreens actually. Or we wouldn't just go down to CVS. Oh, we don't have a CVS actually. So I had to like rethink that, right? But these are some of the conveniences that may be available in the continental US that we don't have in the Virgin Islands. But again, the beauty of sometimes not having access to everything is, one, is that you learn to do more with less. And then two, we have to kind of lean into our ancestral wisdom, right? Because our ancestors didn't have all those things either, but they survived. They're very resilient. They knew before we knew that we would be free, right? And so how do we take moments to pause and tap into that divine wisdom that's internal? It's in our bodies, right? Which is why we celebrate it in Carnival. It's in our bodies, it's not outside of us, to be able to know how to heal ourselves. And so it's a beautiful thing. It could be a pain in the butt to have to jump on a plane to have access to things sometimes. But for the most part, it really is a beautiful thing to learn to just kind of slow down, take pause, and listen to that internal voice, because we know what it is that we need as a people.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that accessibility portion, Black people can make a way out of no way. And
That's
that
right.
is
That make a dollar out of 50 cents. We'll find a way. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. So kind of shifting gears a little bit. You briefly talked about during Carnival how I think the generational shift, they can hold up signs sometimes saying like, put on clothes, and how they can kind of shame women for how they show up. Maybe at the same time kind of delegitimize experiences when harm does happen in Black women's lives. So although we recognize Carnival as a space of liberation and emancipation, how do community members recognize and respond to that sexual harassment that can happen during festivals? So how does that happen?
Yeah. So there needs to be more messaging, I think, about that, right? But that's just opportunity. There's opportunity for us to continue conversations, to advocate for that, to help people to make that connection, so that there isn't victim blaming and shaming and all this kind of thing, right? Because the reality is, because Carnival, while it is a place of freedom and liberation, it is also a place where there is a lot of drinking happening. There is a lot of dancing and sexual behaviors, which there's sexual freedom. We should celebrate it. I absolutely love it. But people can interpret that in the wrong way. And so for me, one of the things that I have practiced going down the road is that, no, you're not going to just come up behind me and dance with me just because I'm dancing. I'm dancing because I want to dance. I'm not dancing because I want to dance with you. Right. So I call people out on that stuff. And then I think this is where women supporting women is so important. And that's why I love girlfriendism. And what I do is that, women look out for each other. So we do, how, you would go out with some girlfriends and you have a creep that's kind of harassing you, and all of a sudden your girlfriend's like, you want to go to the bathroom? Like, that's like the cue word to like, girl, let's get away from this creep. Right. So that happens too in Carnival, where women look out for each other. So traveling in groups and kind of being mindful that, okay, if we see a girlfriend over here looking a little bit uncomfortable, let me interject, right? And sometimes the interjection does not have to be words. It's like, let me just dance in between. Let me just separate this. Like, what's going on, right? Let me feel it out. And then this is where too, you also find a lot of women going to Carnival to dance with each other, right? Creating safe spaces within what could be a potentially unsafe space, because that is comfortable for them. And so, talking about it and helping people to understand that Carnival is fun, it's freedom for that person. It does not give you the right to just feel like you have access to somebody just because they're out in the open, just because they're dancing, just because they're having a good time and drinking alcohol. That is not a free pass to just do whatever you want with them. They still get to choose how they want to engage with you, right? For me, I go down the road, I dance by myself, like I'm good, right? But I've also gone down the road and I'm dancing with two girls or I'm dancing with two guys, I'm good. But that's my choice in that moment. And so helping people to understand that. And so I think it comes down to, leaders understanding that connection, right? Between autonomy, choice, and Carnival, and really pushing that message. It's also up to the troop leaders, right? And talking about, rules of engagement. Okay, our troupe doesn't want to just be known for having the best costume. We also want to be known for people having the best time. And if people don't have a choice as to what they're going to do with their bodies, then they're not going to have the best time. That's not going to be the best for our troupe. And so taking that responsibility to have that conversation with troupe members, right, and the carnival members of their section, to understand like we're all here to have a good time. And part of having a good time is being able to choose how you do that, right? Being able to choose who you engage with and how you engage, and being respectful of that, you know? So it's just having more conversation and helping to connect the two, because I don't think that sometimes elders and even sometimes advocates in the sexual violence field, they might just be so afraid, and right, that's why we can't make decisions from a place of fear. Like they might just be so afraid of what could happen that they avoid the conversation altogether. And that, and again, we can't fight oppression with oppression, we can't fight fear with fear. We got to face the stuff and be like, well, listen, since we are going to do carnival either way, let's have the conversation about how we do carnival safely, how we do carnival and honor everyone's autonomy and their choice in how they engage in carnival. So I think that's definitely an opportunity to have more conversations like that. But I know for me, I think we do it, especially as women, subconsciously, where we're kind of looking out for the other. Like, okay, well, I don't see this one. Where did she go? Oh, okay, she's getting a drink in the truck in the back. Okay, so she's good. Okay, I'm kind of seeing like some interaction here. She's on the floor and there are 3 guys. Does she want to be there? Let me peek my head in. Like, you good? You want to be on the floor? Okay, good. You don't want to be there? Okay, come, let me get you, right? And so it kind of happens subconsciously, but I do think that, you know, having the conversation even in a broader context would definitely be helpful.
Yeah, I think that's good that there's some form of community accountability and intervention for women to keep each other safe. So with that being said, could you maybe speak to potential barriers that might create difficulty for Black survivors to report if they do experience sexual harassment or violence during those cultural celebrations?
Yeah, well, rape culture makes it difficult, right? Again, like that perspective that somehow if someone is in a carnival and, you know, they want to dance and just wear the least amount of clothes, if they want to work up on the floor in the middle of the pavement, like that's their choice. That does not give somebody permission to violate them. It's not an invitation. It's their own personal experience. And so I think just the mindset, and a lot of times, again, it comes down to that mindset of fear. I think that rape culture happens a lot because people are trying to justify certain behaviors because they're also afraid to address the things that happen to them, or they're trying to make sense of something that just wouldn't make sense. Like it just doesn't make sense to rape somebody. It doesn't make sense to violate somebody, but they're trying to make sense of something that doesn't make sense because of the fear that, oh my goodness, if it happened to me, so I will not go down dressed in a 2-piece because I don't want that to happen to me. And so then now instead of becoming a part of the solution, they're now becoming a part of the problem because now they're judging other people who choose to do that, right? So that's the mess with rape culture. That's the mess with fear and being fearful instead of leaning in and trying to come from spaces of compassion and understanding and just recognizing that people get to choose who they want to be. And that none of us have this magic prescription as to what a perfect life or perfect person looks like. It doesn't exist. So just because I choose to do something or not to do something and someone chooses the opposite of that, it doesn't make me better than them in some way. It's just different, right? So I think just mindset is the barrier. I think having an extreme focus in either way is a barrier. So focusing only on, you know, even with tourism, if the focus is only, we'll come down and have carnival, have a great time, then that could be dangerous because then we're not also talking about the other side of it, which is this very real perspective that people may interpret carnival incorrectly and may think that that's an invitation to, oh, come down and take advantage of our women. Let's be clear, when we have platforms to advocate for people to come to our beautiful island and to participate in this, what it is and what it's not, right? And then also if we have this other extreme conversation with elders where it's just like, oh, we'll just put clothes on, or, you know, we're just not supporting this, then we're gonna lose a whole segment of our community who's going to do carnival, whether you're for it or not, whether you come or not, like it's gonna happen. So we have to find ourselves somewhere in the middle. And I think the barrier is having an extremist perspective on it, whether it's on the left or the right. The answer is somewhere in the middle, right? that I think we can find more solutions that way, as opposed to negating either one and having fair, because both of them are channeled unfair, right? I think our tourism industries may be like, oh no, we don't want to talk about sexual violence in Carnival because then no one will want to come. That's a fair response. Or for elders to be like, well, we're not coming because we don't endorse wearing a two-piece. That's a fair response. How can we come from a space of just loving people and honoring their choice? Then we can bring everyone to the table in the middle. So I think mindset is the greatest barrier and how we communicate about it.
Yeah, I think there's also no harm in acknowledging it, too, because like it does
Right.
happen. And just because we don't talk about it doesn't mean it's not happening,
That happens.
So
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. And it is important because my experience with Carnival, and again, this is where we choose how we want to see things. So my first experience with rape was after Carnival, right? But that has not shifted I've been able to, because I'm doing the healing work, I've been able to separate the two, meaning that I don't lump being raped with Carnival. I
Mhm.
see Carnival for what it is. I see the rape for what it is, right? And I think a lot of times when we are going through our healing process, or when we're in a space of trauma, we tend to lump everything together. And I think a lot of times that's what elders do, is that they're lumping, nudity and self-expression with all of the bad things that can happen to women. And yes, that the risk is always there, but the risk is also there if she's fully clothed, because we have to come back to what the root of rape and sexual violence comes from. It doesn't come back to the clothes. And so we have to use our fear to channel education and understanding, transform that, right? Transform how we, because of trauma, how we may lump certain places and spaces with certain experiences, and be able to see that they are not all one and the same, right? And to just also always hold space that everybody's story is different. Everybody's experience is going to be different. I'm sure, if you interview someone else who may have a whole different experience with Carnival, where they may have been violated in the parade, where they may have been, raped at the parade, they may have a completely different perspective, and they may just hate Carnival altogether, right? And we still have to hold space for that, because everybody is in a different phase of their healing journey, of their experience. Everyone sees the world differently, and we have to hold space for all of it, because all of it is true. Everyone's truth is their truth, and all of it is true, right? So I always say, when it comes to situations of sexual violence and just our experience, there are all these truths and no lies, right? Because your truth is your truth, your experience is your experience. You can't argue that. But I think it definitely helps when we're able to look at things for what it is from our lens, even, and be careful not to attach one thing to another because of our trauma or because of our experiences, because then again, that's coming from a place of fear. And so we have to remember to just come from a place of love.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think Carnival is a beautiful celebration. But we still have to, like, that responsibility to keep people safe within that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just find both ends.
Okay, this is our final question.
Oh.
So I know this has been wonderful. So how does the celebration of Carnival attribute to Black women taking control of their own bodily autonomies and narratives beyond just Carnival?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's the obvious parts of it is, again, being able to choose to just go down in Carnival however you want to, right? And I think the other part of it, though, is really being able to provide a space where women can connect with their bodies, where we can connect with our bodies. Our body experiences everything, our mind experiences it. And I think because in our world, we are so highly intellectual, in the sense that we overthink things and we overanalyze things, we forget our body is here. Like, I can give you the information you need. I can heal you. Like, I can give you the cues that you need to survive. I do give you the cues you need to survive. Your intuition lies in this body. Like, our bodies are always working and conspiring in our favor, right? But if we are only thinking of life and experiencing life from this place, we never get to really fully experience it from this whole space. And I think Carnival is an avenue for that, because it really is about the movement and the dance. It's the one time where we're fully in our bodies and coming out a little bit of our mind and overthinking things, right? I think when people don't come to Carnival is because they're overthinking something. They're overthinking, how are people going to think about me if they see me wearing this? They're overthinking, well, even as an advocate, I had, a couple years where I was just like, well, I'm an advocate for sexual violence prevention. How is it going to look if I go to the parade and people are dressed and acting this way? We overthink things, right? And so Carnival actually gives us the opportunity to kind of turn off this a little bit and turn on that internal wisdom of, what does it feel like if I were just to be free in my body? And that's a beautiful thing for women, especially for sexual violence survivors, because oftentimes to survive, we detach from our bodies, right? Because now our body has become this place and space of violence and of trauma, and so we don't want to be connected to it. But there is such beauty when we allow ourselves to be in spaces where we can fully immerse in our bodies and to feel the emotion that comes with that, whether it is an overwhelming feeling of sadness, right, because of what may have occurred, or an overwhelming sense of joy because what we have overcome despite what we have experienced, right? To be able to feel sensual with oneself and to just have intimacy with our own bodies and to be able to express that amongst other people who are also expressing it in the moment. It's like a movement for a day of just being in our bodies. That is so important for Black women to have access to that, right? Because then they also know they're not doing it alone. Many of us who are coming down the Carnival route, there's 1 in 3 women that we know of. Half of us in that Carnival have experienced sexual violence. Yet, because Carnival is also a place of resistance, we're saying that even though this has happened, this is now happening too, and I get to choose now, and I get to be free in this body, and that experience does not get to control me. It does not get to hold me down. I'm doing it, I'm free. And I'm doing it with my sisters who have also experienced something similar that could be so heartbreaking and could traumatize us for life, but we're choosing to have this moment of liberation for ourselves and to celebrate each other in that. And so it's important for Black women to have access to that space, and that's what Carnival is.
Yeah, I have no notes. Mic drop. That was beautifully said, truly. Yeah, I really don't have anything to say. That was all that could be said about Carnival. So yes, thank you so much.
Thank you.
This has been wonderful.
I totally enjoyed it. Thank you for holding space. Thank you for thinking of me. Sometimes we get lost in the islands, so it's good to feel a part of the whole national movement and to be able to share this perspective. And so I hope that it was helpful, and I hope that folks join us for Carnival next year.
Yes, lovely. Is there anything you'd like to leave us with?
Oh my goodness. There's so much. I mean, I think I left a little bit of nuggets there. Yes. I think is, trust your journey and trust your process. So I obviously am an advocate for Carnival, right? I'm obviously an advocate for self-expression through clothing or no clothing. I'm an advocate for all of that, but your individual journeys, let that speak to you. Know that your body has the wisdom to inform what that looks like for you. So it's going to be different for everybody, and that's okay, because that's what makes us unique. That's what makes us beautiful. And that uniqueness is what's worth celebrating. So celebrate it in the way that you are to celebrate it on your journey. That's the first thing I would say. And then of course, if folks want to get in touch with me, folks can reach me at girlfriendism@gmail.com. I check all the emails. I can't say I check them all on time. I check them on island time, but I do check them. All right. And of course they can follow me and the work that I'm doing with girlfriendism.com, including our nonprofit HOPE, which stands for Helping Ordinary People Every Day to Be Extraordinary Through the Arts and Creative Expression. And that's where we do all of our work with sexual violence survivors as well, to help them to feel free in their own bodies. So I look forward to remaining connected, and I thank you again for holding space and for having me.
Thank you so much, Khnuma. This has been great. I've enjoyed learning so much from you today. Yeah. I'll say bye to everyone joining us. Thank you so much.
Bye.